The autumn wind swept through Haisheng with a bitter bite, carrying a sharp chill that made it feel as if winter had crashed into the city overnight. Clara Hale stood alone at a bus stop, half listening to two young women gossiping beside her. "Have you seen the entertainment headlines this morning? Leela Moore's secret benefactor has been exposed." They walked hand in hand out of a luxury 5-star hotel for all the paparazzi to capture. "I knew that rookie actress had someone bankrolling her career from day one. This photo is undeniable proof now." Her studio put out such a vague, soft statement too, practically hinting they're meant to be together. Clara unlocked her phone, scrolling through an avalanche of identical trending articles plastered across every social media platform. Every photo captured Ethan Ward beside Leela, their smiles warm and unguarded for the cameras. Her breath hitched sharply, hot tears splattering across the cracked glass screen before she could blink them away. No stranger might fail to recognize the man in those shots, but Clara knew him better than she knew herself. Ethan, her husband of 3 years, a marriage hidden from the entire world. "The bus is here! Hurry up! There won't be any seats left!" A crowd of rushing commuters shoved her forward, and Clara stumbled onto the overcrowded vehicle, pressed tight against the cold glass window. Giant billboards featuring Leela's airbrushed, flawless face lined every city block. Ethan spared no expense, pouring endless cash into the young star's promotional campaigns and film roles. Clara glanced at her own faint, worn reflection in the glass, a hollow, self-deprecating laugh dying in her throat when she compared herself to Leela's spotlight glamour. Ethan never acknowledged her existence in public. Once they stepped outside the walls of their shared mansion, Clara might as well have been a total stranger to him. No matter how far she trekked on public transit, or how sore her feet grew from walking miles, he never spared a single thought for her struggles. Clara was jostled off the bus one stop early, lost in tangled, agonizing thoughts. A brutal twist sent searing pain shooting up her ankle as she stumbled onto the curb. She winced, staring down at the rapidly purpling, swollen skin beneath her thin canvas sneakers. A sleek black Maybach rolled past her on the asphalt. Ethan's vehicle, she recognized it instantly, but the tinted windows never lowered, not a single tap of the brakes. Even if she'd collapsed dead on the sidewalk in broad daylight, he would ignore her to avoid any tabloid gossip linking them together. Dragging her throbbing foot back to the Ward mansion, Clara slipped off her shoes and sank onto the entryway bench, exhaustion weighing down every limb. A sudden, stabbing cramp twisted through her abdomen, nearly sending her crashing to the floor. Ethan was already waiting on the leather living room sofa, dressed in soft loungewear, a half-empty mug of black coffee balanced in one hand. His voice turned cold and sharp the second she crossed the threshold. "Where were you last night?" "I stayed over at Mia's apartment," Clara replied flat, already ready to retreat to their bedroom to escape his icy glare. Ethan's brows knitted tight. "I'm sure you've seen the tabloid coverage about Leela. She's only just broken into the entertainment industry. All this buzz is necessary for her career. Don't let it get under your skin." Clara's fingers stiffened at her sides, her gaze sliding to meet his. "There's no need to explain anything to me." A flicker of irritation crossed his impossibly handsome features, looks that easily outshone A-list Hollywood stars. "Are you upset?" A bitter, hollow chuckle escaped Clara's lips. "Not at all." "Clara, I've told you time and again," he said, his tone thick with impatience. "No matter what goes on outside these walls, your position as my legal wife will never be threatened. This is a status countless women would beg to claim." Another mocking smile tugged at her mouth, while the twisting ache in her gut intensified. Cold sweat soaked through the strands of her dark hair as she fled to their bedroom, hoping the discomfort would fade on its own. But this pain was foreign and terrifying in its ferocity. For 3 full years, she'd existed as nothing more than a silent, invisible ghost tied to Ethan's life. The reason they'd married was a cruel secret, shared only between the two of them and the late Mr. Harold Ward. Ethan was merely an adopted heir, raised by the old man to run Ward Group. Clara carried the genuine Ward bloodline, the sole legitimate granddaughter of the family patriarch. Without marrying her, he could never secure 100% ownership of the corporate empire Harold had built decades prior. "Ethan," she gasped, clutching her midsection as crippling spasms racked her frame. She stumbled forward and crashed to the hardwood floor, her swollen ankle throbbing alongside the unbearable abdominal agony. She needed him to drive her to the hospital. Ethan sprinted out of the bathroom at the sound of her collapse, panic flashing across his face for a split second. "Clara!" "My stomach hurts so badly. Can you please take me to the hospital?" Her voice trembled as she begged for help. Before she could finish her plea, Ethan's phone buzzed shrilly on the coffee table. He snatched it up, and every drop of colour drained from his face as he listened to the frantic voice on the other end of the line. "Mr. Ward, Leela's been in a car accident." That single sentence erased every trace of concern he'd held for Clara. He shot her a dismissive glance, already grabbing his tailored suit jacket hanging over the arm of the sofa. "It's just a stomachache. Grab a taxi to the clinic by yourself, all right? Something urgent's come up with Leela. I have to leave." In Ethan's eyes, Clara was endlessly resilient, capable of handling any crisis without a word of support. She stared up at him numb, her ears ringing with the name Leela, the young actress who'd stolen every scrap of his attention. "Ethan, I truly can't bear this pain," she begged, her throat raw from suppressed sobs. "Just drink some warm water and rest. Be reasonable," he ordered, emphasizing the word harshly before rushing out the front door without a single backward glance. The world spun around Clara, and darkness swallowed her whole as her consciousness slipped away. In the faint haze before she blacked out, one looping thought haunted her mind. Had she been far too compliant and accommodating all these years, giving him free rein to abandon her without a second thought? Hours later, Mercy General Hospital bustled with medical staff well past midnight. Leela sat propped up in a wheelchair, glistening tear tracks streaking her perfectly made-up cheeks. "Ethan, I thought I'd never see you again," she whimpered, burying her face against his arm the moment he knelt beside her. Ethan's jaw tightened as he turned to her agent. "How did this accident happen?" The driver got distracted and swerved into a guardrail. Nothing life-threatening, only minor lacerations on her legs. The doctors have treated the wounds. No permanent scarring will remain. Ethan's rigid shoulders relaxed instantly. "Fire that driver effective immediately." The agent and his assistants exchanged knowing looks before slipping out of the private room, leaving the two of them alone to foster their manufactured intimacy. Leela clung tighter to his arm as Ethan's phone vibrated non-stop in his pocket. "Ethan, you've been getting calls this whole time. Should you answer it?" she asked, feigning gentle thoughtfulness. He barely spared the screen a glance, recognizing Clara's name displayed across the front. A flicker of mild annoyance stirred in his chest. Clara never called him unprompted, not once in 3 years of marriage. He held no interest in romantic love, and Clara fit the mold of a perfect spouse. Quiet, obedient, never clingy. He'd wed her solely to satisfy Harold's final wishes and lock down full corporate ownership. "It's nothing important," he muttered, powering the phone off completely before wheeling Leela toward the hospital exit. Leela's voice softened into a vulnerable murmur. I'm still so shaken up from the crash. Can you stay with me tonight? Ethan hesitated for a split second, his mind briefly drifting back to Clara. She'd sliced her palm open with kitchen knives in the past and never shed a single tear, never demanded comfort from him. Women like Leela, who cried over trivial injuries, stoked his protective instincts far more easily. I remember when we were both in the orphanage together, Lila whispered, her voice small and fragile. I cried every night back then, and you stayed up to comfort me. The memory pulled at his heartstrings, and he nodded in surrender. As Ethan's luxury vehicle pulled out of the hospital parking lot, an ambulance with blaring sirens tore past the driveway. Ethan never glanced over to see the unconscious woman being carried out on a gurney. Clara, Mia Carter, rode beside the stretcher, sobbing uncontrollably as she clutched Clara's cold, lifeless hand. Few people knew about Clara's hidden marriage to Ethan, and Mia was one of her only lifelong confidants. Doctor, please save her, Mia wailed, sinking to her knees on the linoleum hospital floor. What's her family situation? Does she have a legal spouse to sign emergency consent forms? The attending physician asked, his expression grave. She's in hemorrhagic shock from a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. We need to perform emergency abdominal surgery to remove one of her fallopian tubes immediately. Any more delay will cost her her life. Mia's legs buckled beneath her. She's married, but I can't reach her husband, no matter how many times I call. Has she ever given birth before? Mia shook her head through her tears. Ethan had never wanted children, so Clara took contraceptive pills every single day without exception. The doctor sighed heavily and retreated back into the operating suite to begin the life-saving procedure, while Mia sat on the cold floor, dialing Ethan's number over and over until her thumb ached against the screen. He never picked up once. By dawn, the hospital hallways buzzed with gossip between shift-changing nurses scrolling entertainment feeds, filled with photos of Ethan and Leela leaving a luxury penthouse together in the early hours. Mia stared at the headlines on her phone screen, white-hot rage burning behind her red, swollen eyes. Clara's eyelids fluttered open as the grey morning light seeped through the hospital window, and in that quiet moment, every illusion she'd clung to for years shattered completely. Clara, you're awake! Mia rushed to her bedside, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. If the hospital administrator hadn't bent the rules to operate without your husband's signature, you wouldn't be here right now. You owe Ethan nothing, not a single ounce of your loyalty. Owed him something, Clara rasped, her throat raw from disuse. What do you owe him? Grandfather forced him to marry me. That debt was created long ago. Not anymore, Clara. After Mia left the room to fetch some warm soup, Clara pulled herself out of bed, ignoring the searing pain in her abdomen. She limped to the doctor's office and knocked. The attending physician looked up in surprise. Miss Hale, you should be resting. Clara sat down slowly, her voice steady but hollow. Doctor, I need to know the truth. Will I ever be able to have children again? The doctor hesitated, then removed his glasses. Your right fallopian tube was removed. The left one shows mild adhesions. Natural conception will be significantly more difficult. With long-term treatment, there is a chance, but it will not be easy. Clara nodded without a flicker of emotion. She thanked him and walked back to her ward, each step a stab of pain that she welcomed. It reminded her that she was still alive and that she would never allow herself to be so vulnerable again. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. With trembling fingers, she typed, "From today on, I will not shed another tear for him." Then she deleted his contact name and saved it as Mr. Ward. Clara's mother had been a cabaret dancer, looked down upon by the old Ward family for her low social standing. Back when societal customs dictated arranged marriages, Arthur Ward, Clara's father, had loved her fiercely, regardless of Harold's disapproval. Arthur had defied the entire Ward clan and run away with her mother to live a quiet, ordinary life, far from the family's vast fortune. When Clara turned 15, her parents were killed instantly in a highway collision, and Harold tracked her down to bring her back to the Ward mansion. Even then, the old man had never truly warmed to her, yet she remained the only blood heir of the Ward name. Ethan had already spent a full decade being groomed as Harold's chosen successor by the time she arrived at the estate. He was 18, she only 15. "From now on, I'll protect you," he'd told her once, when she'd hidden away miserable in the unwelcoming mansion. At that moment, Clara had fallen irrevocably in love with him at first sight. Her youthful, naive adoration deepened like aged wine as the years slipped by. Quiet and compliant, she slowly won Harold's reluctant acceptance as his granddaughter. 3 years prior, Harold had passed away, leaving Ethan fully capable of steering Ward Group back to unprecedented heights within just 2 years. To the outside world, Ethan was a peerless prodigy, the sole Ward heir. Only Clara knew the ugly truth of his adoption. If the public learned she carried the true Ward bloodline, Ethan's position would crumble to that of a mere in-law. That was why he'd insisted their marriage stay hidden from every pair of eyes. He'd never been cruel to her within their home, she admitted to herself. Birthdays and anniversaries always brought expensive gifts, and he'd repeat the same hollow promise time and time again. "As long as you stay obedient, I'll give you everything you could ever want, and no one can take your place." But Clara had never cared about empty status or material wealth hidden away from public view. For nearly a decade, she'd loved him with every fibre of her being, clinging to the faint warmth he occasionally offered, convincing herself patience would eventually earn her the love she craved. She'd trapped herself in a self-made fantasy, blind to the cold reality surrounding her. "Last night, you nearly died alone, and he spent the entire night with Leela," Mia said, unable to hold back the harsh truth to spare her friend's feelings. "He pours millions into her promotional campaigns and film roles, yet never bothers to check if you're alive or hurt." Mia pulled up a photo on her phone, a set of emerald jewelry draped around Leela's neck at a recent film festival. A jagged stab pierced Clara's chest the second she saw it. That jewelry had been Arthur's engagement gift to her mother, designated by Harold as the heirloom set for the future Mrs. Ward. After her parents' deaths, Clara had returned the set to Harold, assuming it would one day come back to her. She'd never imagined Ethan would hand the priceless sentimental relic to a complete stranger. A bitter, silent sob welled up inside her, no tears falling from her bloodshot eyes. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of quiet devotion, and she still could not win an ounce of genuine affection from him. "I'm so tired, Mia." Back at the Ward mansion at dawn, Ethan stumbled through the front door, exhausted after soothing Leela to sleep. His heart lurched when he spotted streaks of dried blood staining the entryway carpet. "Clara!" He sprinted toward their bedroom, panic surging through him, only to find the room empty. He fumbled to unlock his dead phone and stared at hundreds of missed calls from her number, a cold, hollow feeling spreading through his ribs. At Mercy General Hospital, Ethan rushed into Clara's private ward. The autumn sunlight filtered through the windows, carrying no warmth at all. For a split second, his heart skipped a beat at the sight of her pale, lifeless face on the hospital pillows. His fingers went numb as he stepped slowly to her bedside. "Mr. Ward, you're certainly a busy man," Mia snapped, setting a thermos of hot congee down on the side table. Clara suffered a ruptured ectopic pregnancy and hemorrhaged severely last night. Who signed for emergency surgery when she was dying at home alone? Ethan's brows drew together, irritated by Mia's sharp reprimand. "Mia, let me speak to him alone," Clara whispered hoarsely. Mia's eyes flooded with rage. "He spent the whole night with that actress while you fought for your life. If you forgive him after this, I'll never respect you again." "Mia, watch your tone with me." Ethan's voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl, a clear warning of his limited patience. Clara stared at him in quiet despair. He'd grown defensive the instant Mia called Leela a homewrecker. "Apologize to Mia," Clara said flat, issuing an order to Ethan for the very first time in their lives together. Ethan froze, shocked by her unrecognizable resolve. From the day she'd returned to the Ward estate at 15, she'd been soft and passive as a lifeless rabbit, never once raising her voice against him. After a beat of hesitation, he mumbled a stiff, half-hearted apology toward Mia before she stormed out of the room. "Pay no mind to those tabloid stories," Ethan attempted to soothe her, falling back on lines he'd rehearsed dozens of times to calm her minor grievances. "My phone died last night. There's nothing romantic between Leela and me." "Ethan, I want a divorce." Silence crashed over the small hospital room, thick and suffocating. Clara could hear the faint thud of his heartbeat, yet it beat for someone else, never her. "Don't say this out of petty anger," Ethan said coolly. "I have no intention of dissolving our marriage. I know you're hurting and recovering from surgery. Name any compensation you want, and I'll provide it. We can revisit this conversation once you've fully healed." His tone was clinical, transactional, as if negotiating a corporate merger rather than discussing their broken marriage. Clara lifted her head to meet his gaze, desperate to burn every last false hope out of her heart. "I have one condition if we're to continue this farce. Pull all funding and promotional projects tied to Leela Moore. I never want to hear her name anywhere again." Ethan's expression hardened with frustration. "You're being unreasonable right now." He stood and turned to leave without another word, leaving Clara alone with her shattered heart. She dug her fingernails deep into her palms until they bled, waiting in vain for him to ask even a single question about the child she'd lost, the baby she'd carried, his baby. Clara remained in the hospital for 2 full weeks. Ethan visited her only twice in that entire span. She never spoke a single word to him during those brief encounters, merely lying silent and listening to the other patients chat about ordinary, loving marriages, drowning in the cold loneliness of autumn. He'd tried to move her to a secluded VIP suite to avoid prying eyes, so he could visit without drawing attention, but she'd refused the offer. Solitude terrified her more than anything. "Miss Hale, Mia will be here this afternoon to pick you up," Ethan's personal assistant informed her each day. Clara's voice was thin and drained. "Where's Ethan?" "He intended for you to check out tomorrow, but tonight is Leela's birthday gala. A room full of top industry executives will attend. He cannot afford to miss the event." Clara swung her legs over the hospital bed and stood to leave without a word. An older woman, sharing her semi-private room, chatted about her own second miscarriage with her devoted husband, who rubbed her sore legs gently and spoke soft words of comfort. Clara watched them, hot tears stinging her eyes, longing for that quiet, ordinary warmth she'd never known. She pulled her thin coat tighter against the autumn chill and stepped out into the hallway alone. At Blue Bay Pavilion, Leela's birthday venue, executives crowded around Ethan's banquet table. His gaze kept drifting to his phone, reading the assistant's updates that Clara planned to discharge herself that day. Leela leaned into his side with a shy, coy smile. Let me toast on your behalf, Ethan. Leela is like a younger sister to me. All of you directors should give her your professional support, Ethan addressed the room flatly. The table erupted in knowing laughter, everyone misinterpreting their bond as a secret romance. Leela's wine glass trembled in her hands, forcing a nervous smile to hide her hurt. Mr. Ward has sacrificed a great deal to boost Leela's public profile, her agent chuckled, gesturing for Leela to raise her glass in a toast. Ethan massaged his throbbing temples and lit a cigarette. I have other matters to attend to, excuse me. He intended to rush to the hospital to collect Clara. Ethan, don't leave yet, Leela panicked, grabbing his arm to block his path out of the private dining room. She'd invited every powerful industry figure she knew to her celebration, specifically to showcase her connection to him, and she could not afford to lose face. She followed him into the empty hallway to speak quietly. Is your wife upset with me? Ethan blinked, unfamiliar with the term wife used to reference Clara. Enjoy your party, he replied, glancing at his watch before hurrying away. Leela's eyes welled with dejection. She knew Ethan belonged to another woman, hidden away from the world, and she could never claim a public title beside him. Later, her friends showed her the limited edition designer handbag Ethan had gifted her for her birthday, and Leela fell silent, knowing his generosity meant nothing without a legal ring on her finger. Back at the Ward mansion, Clara wandered the silent halls, the space cold and devoid of any warmth. She traced 2 matching toothbrushes lined up on the bathroom counter with icy fingertips, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Mia had accompanied her home to pack her belongings, ready to move out permanently. There was little for her to take. She only wanted one last look at the house that had held 3 years of her wasted love. Ethan raced back from the birthday party in a foul mood, arriving to find the hospital empty and the mansion silent. Damn it, he snarled, slamming his fist into the bathroom mirror, splitting the glass surface open. The dual toothbrushes were gone, leaving only his own solitary one resting on the marble sink. A strange hollow emptiness settled over his chest, which he dismissed as mere habit. 3 years of shared living meant even a pet would stir grief if it vanished. He did not love Clara, but he valued her utility as his legal wife, a permanent fixture he'd grown accustomed to relying on. He assumed her outburst was temporary grief from her surgery, that she would cool off at Mia's apartment and return to normal within days. But when he pushed open their master bedroom door, all breath left his lungs. Every trace of Clara had vanished without a single stray hair left behind. Stacked across the mattress sat dozens of gift boxes, every expensive present Ethan had ever given her over 3 years. Most remained unopened, their ribbons untouched. Leela lit up with joy at every gift he presented, while Clara had never displayed any visible excitement. Resting on the pillow lay their red marriage certificate, alongside a fully drafted divorce agreement, signed in her neat handwriting. Rage exploded through Ethan's veins, and he swept every box off the bed, sending them crashing across the hardwood floor. After sweeping the gift boxes off the bed, Ethan stood panting in the middle of the room, his chest heaving with rage. His eyes darted around, searching for anything left of her. He walked to the walk-in closet, half expecting to see her dresses still hanging. Empty, but in the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a folded scarf, he found a small, rusty tin box. He pried it open. Inside lay a stack of movie ticket stubs, yellowed with age. He picked up the first one, a date from 3 years ago, a romantic comedy. On the back, Clara's handwriting. He mentioned he liked this film. I bought 2 tickets, but he worked late. Adasta. Another. White Valentine's Day. I bought tickets again. He said he had clients. Aria. A third, from the month they married. 3. The premiere of that action film he wanted to see. He took Leela instead. Tast. Ethan's hands began to shake. He rifled through them until he reached the very last stub, the date of their wedding day. On the back, in faint pencil, "Today, he married me. I thought happiness had finally begun." He dropped the box and slumped against the closet wall, pressing the last ticket to his forehead. For the first time in years, he let out a low, guttural sob. He had never once asked her about these things. He had never seen her love, because he had never bothered to look. Mia's small downtown apartment glowed under dim streetlights that night, autumn wind swirling dead maple leaves past the windows. Mia's heater barely functioned, so she'd run to a 24-hour convenience store to buy disposable heat patches, pressing a cute Pikachu hand warmer into Clara's palm before rushing out. Rain had begun to fall, bringing a sharp drop in temperature, and Clara's body was still fragile from massive blood loss during her surgery. A frantic knock echoed through the entryway hours later. Clara opened the door to find Ethan soaked through with rainwater, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, disheveled in a way she'd never seen him since she'd first moved to the Ward estate at 15. "It's past midnight," Clara said softly. Ethan's first words carried sharp blame. "I told you to wait until tomorrow to check out of the hospital." Clara fell silent, standing barefoot on the cold linoleum floor. "Come home with me," Ethan ordered, his eyes fixed on her pale, bloodless face. A weak, sad smile tugged at her lips. "Have you read the divorce papers I left at the house? I won't fight over any of the Ward family's assets." Her father had walked away from all wealth for her mother once, and she would do the same. Ethan said nothing, his gaze drinking in her delicate features. Clara possessed striking eyes and fair skin that turned ghostly pale whenever she was unwell, carrying a fragile, tragic beauty he'd always found physically appealing. When Harold had demanded he marry her, he'd not hesitated, knowing she would obey every demand without complaint. "I was wrong today. Come back with me," Ethan said, ignoring her refusal and sweeping her off her feet to carry her toward his car. "Ethan, let go of me!" Clara's face drained of all color, her strength too depleted to push him away. Mia rounded the corner, carrying a bag of heat patches, just in time to witness Ethan carrying Clara down the apartment stairs toward his Maybach. "You monster! Put her down!" Mia screamed. Clara trembled violently, trapped in the vehicle's back seat. She'd suffered lifelong trauma after watching her parents die in a highway collision from the rear passenger seat as a child, and riding alone back there triggered crippling panic attacks. "Let me out, please," she begged through racking sobs, scratching desperately at the car door handles. Mia banged furiously against the windows, but Ethan ignored her pleas and hit the gas hard, speeding away into the night. Back at the mansion, Ethan lifted Clara out of the car. She curled into a tight ball in the rear footwell, shaking uncontrollably, unable to speak from overwhelming terror. "Clara, what's wrong? I'll call the family doctor," Ethan panicked, pulling her into his arms before her eyes rolled back and she slipped into unconsciousness. The Ward family physician arrived shortly after, examining Clara with a grave expression. "Miss Hale's body remains extremely fragile, and she suffers from severe traumatic shock syndrome. You must avoid upsetting her at all costs." Ethan had always known Clara was reclusive, refusing to ride any of the Ward family's luxury vehicles and choosing buses or long walks instead, yet he'd never bothered to ask the reason behind her fear. For 3 years, Ward Group had consumed every waking hour of his life, leaving no space to care for her quiet suffering. He sat beside her unconscious form that night, studying her face for the first time in years. "Just behave," he murmured to her sleeping figure. Clara woke hours later to the sound of running water from the ensuite bathroom. Ethan's phone vibrated non-stop on the nightstand. The contact name displayed simply Qing, short for Leela's pet nickname. A bitter laugh escaped her as she picked up the device and answered the incoming call. "Ethan, I drank too much tonight. Can I come over to your place?" Leela slurred through tearful, intoxicated sobs. Clara listened silently before ending the call with trembling fingers. The thought of Leela occupying their marital bed while she was gone sent her spiraling into a breakdown. She grabbed a pair of household scissors and shredded the silk bedsheets into tattered strips, silent tears splattering the wooden floor. She'd never been one to display raw emotion, but the agony had grown too heavy to contain. Ethan stepped out, wrapped in a bath towel, to find the ruined sheets scattered across the floor. "Clara, what have you done?" Clara lifted the scissors, still clutched in her bleeding fingertips. "Leela called, begging you to pick her up." Ethan frowned, reaching for his phone to check the missed calls. "You answered my private phone?" Before Clara could reply, Leela's agent dialed frantically to report that the actress had wandered off after using the restroom at the venue, her injured leg still unhealed. Ethan grabbed his jacket and rushed out the door without a second glance at Clara's broken heart. Despair crashed over her in waves, and she huddled in the dark corner of the bedroom, afraid to close her eyes. Time slipped by, and the front door creaked open once more. Clara stepped out of the hallway to see Ethan carrying a drunk, tearful Leela in his arms. "Ethan, I'm so scared," Leela whimpered against his shoulder. "Can Leela stay the night?" Ethan asked Clara for permission, fully expecting her to agree without argument. Clara drew a shaky breath. "I'll sleep in the guest room." She found herself ridiculous for tolerating this humiliation for 3 years, watching her husband tend to another woman in their own home. "Are you angry with me?" Ethan grabbed her wrist to hold her back. "Sign the divorce papers as soon as you can. It will be easier for all 3 of us." Clara pulled free and walked toward the spare bedroom. Leela continued to whine on the living room sofa about stomach cramps long into the night. Ethan's patience frayed thin. "Do you think I'm afraid to divorce you?" he snapped at Clara. Ward Group fell fully under his control now. Clara held no corporate authority without the public backing of her bloodline. He'd only wed her to repay Harold's decades of mentorship, and while he'd promised she would always be his wife if she stayed obedient, she'd chosen to walk away first. That night, Ethan slept beside Clara in the guest room out of unconscious habit, wrapping an arm loosely around her waist as she slept. She remained awake, silent tears soaking the pillow, the embrace cold and empty, offering no comfort whatsoever. Down the hall in the secondary guest room, Leela seethed alone, throwing pillows across the floor in a fit of rage. She'd worked tirelessly to escape the orphanage and build her celebrity career, yet she would never hold the title of Mrs. Ward as long as Clara remained Ethan's legal spouse. The next morning, Leela emerged from the guest room, pretending to be contrite, offering a bowl of congee she'd cooked for Clara as a peace offering. Clara saw through her performative kindness instantly and spoke without restraint. "Save the fake politeness, you have no shame." Leela's eyes instantly flooded with staged tears. "I never meant to cause trouble between you and Ethan. At minimum, address him as my husband, or refer to me as your sister-in-law if you insist on calling him brother. Have you no basic manners?" Clara replied flatly. Leela's tears flowed harder for dramatic effect, ready to storm out of the house. The front door opened just as she reached the hallway, Ethan returning from midday work. Elle hurried to his side, leaning against his arm to paint herself as the victim of Clara's cruelty. "Ethan, I only wanted to be polite, but your wife spoke harshly to me." Ethan's gaze flicked to Clara, waiting for her explanation. "I spoke the truth," she said without remorse. "I grew up in an orphanage too." Ethan's voice turned sharp. "Do you think I'm worthless because of my background?" Clara stared at him in quiet sorrow. She'd loved him for 10 years, yet he would always choose to believe Leela's manipulative lies over her honest heart. "Ethan, we don't need to torture each other any longer. Let's get divorced," Clara said, drained beyond all endurance. "Don't keep threatening me with separation," Ethan snapped back. "You only married me to repay grandfather's kindness toward you. That debt is long settled." Clara swayed unsteadily on her feet. "I truly want to leave." She could no longer live trapped in a cycle of endless heartbreak and panic attacks. "Fine," Ethan gritted his teeth, his eyes glistening with unrecognized emotion. "Don't come begging me to reverse this choice later." Clara's tears burned hot against her cheeks. "I will never regret leaving you." She carried her own pride, and love without reciprocation was not worth clinging to any longer. "I'll give you the rest of the afternoon to reconsider your decision. If you still want to split tonight, I'll sign everything." Ethan stormed out of the mansion, leaving Clara alone in the empty living room. Every wall held memories of her one-sided devotion, and she sank to the floor, pulling at her hair as she broke down completely. 3 years of hidden marriage amounted to nothing more than a cruel, empty dream that left her as a laughingstock. That midnight, Ethan drowned his sorrows at an upscale private nightclub, surrounded by wealthy business associates. His friends whispered gossip about his rumored romance with Leela, sneering that starlets only cared about his fortune. Ethan defended Leela fiercely, sparking a bitter argument with Tanner Reed, his oldest childhood friend. "If you don't love her, hand her over to me," Tanner murmured low enough for only Ethan to hear. Ethan grabbed Tanner's collar and threw a punch at his jaw. The two men brawled violently in the private VIP room, decades of buried tension exploding to the surface. They'd grown up side by side, their families old wartime allies and business partners, yet Tanner had never hidden his disdain for Ethan's treatment of Clara. "You abandoned her while she nearly died in agony," Tanner shouted, wiping blood from his split lip. Leela rushed into the room mid-fight to cling to Ethan's side, playing the devoted, worried lover. Tanner could not stomach her manufactured vulnerability and told her exactly what he thought of her manipulative schemes. Ethan demanded Tanner apologize to Leela, which only fueled the fight further. After Tanner stormed off in disgust, Leela attempted to comfort the drunk, irritable Ethan, who brushed her off and left the club alone. He drove aimlessly around the city's elevated highways, too cowardly to return home and face the divorce papers waiting on his coffee table. Back at the mansion, Clara dressed in a simple white sundress, the only gift from Ethan she'd never opened or returned. 2 sets of divorce paperwork, ink pads, and a pen sat neatly on the sofa. She waited for his arrival, bracing herself for more empty promises that she knew would never come to fruition. She'd fallen for Ethan's handsome face and gentle teenage kindness once, but love without mutual care could never last. The marriage had no villain, only 2 people bound by a loveless contract built on obligation. It was 1 o'clock in the morning when the front door finally unlocked. Clara lifted her head to meet his exhausted, disheveled gaze. "Sign the papers," she told him softly. "You may rewrite the clauses if you dislike my draft." She intended to walk away from every single Ward asset, following her father's choice decades earlier. Ethan scoffed at her self-sacrificing pride, annoyed that she would discard everything he'd fought to attain. The draft contains legal loopholes my corporate lawyers need to revise. Come to my office tomorrow morning. Clara left the mansion that night after cleaning up every trace of her belongings, realizing the home had never truly belonged to her. Ethan returned to an empty living room hours later, automatically calling for her to bring him water before realizing she was gone. Habit was a terrifying, bittersweet thing. Clara wandered to the city riverfront long after midnight, autumn wind biting through her thin coat. She sank down in a shadowed corner and wept silently, mourning 10 years of unrequited love for a man who never valued her existence. Tanner and Mia found her huddled there soon after, and Tanner scolded her for wasting years on a man who did not deserve her heart. The three walked home together, Tanner trailing behind them to ensure no taxis were required. He knew Clara's crippling fear of private vehicles. The next morning, Clara travelled to Ward Group headquarters to finalise the revised divorce documents, only to cross paths with Leela in the building lobby. Leela bragged that Ethan planned to let her move into the mansion permanently, mocking Clara for being discarded. The elevator ride to Ethan's top-floor office was agonizing for Clara, forced to watch Leela preen like the new lady of the house. She waited for 4 full hours as Ethan sat locked in a corporate board meeting, burning with a low-grade fever left over from her surgery. When he finally entered the office, she delivered a single demand. She would not surrender the 20% original Ward stock Harold had gifted to her exclusively. Ethan slammed a non-disclosure agreement onto the desk alongside the divorce forms. If Clara ever revealed their hidden marriage or his adopted status to the public, she would forfeit all her shares. Clara signed both documents without hesitation. The contract, a humiliating insult, meant to erase every trace of her from his life forever. When Ethan demanded the reason for her sudden resolve to leave, she fabricated a story of meeting another man who knew how to treat her with kindness, a lie meant to sever all lingering attachment between them. Ethan flew into a jealous rage, convinced Clara had cheated on him with a corporate rival named Leo Shaw, a board member who'd been pursuing her stock holdings for months. The next day, Clara waited alone at the Civil Affairs Bureau from morning until night, only to be stood up once again. Ethan had rushed to tend to Leela's minor leg injury instead. Heartbroken and overwhelmed, she collapsed into a panic attack outside the government building, and Ethan carried her back to the mansion against her will. That night, Leela orchestrated a vicious plot to ruin Clara's reputation, hiring tabloid reporters to plant a story claiming Mia had leaked Ethan's adopted heritage to the press. The scandal sent Ward Group's stock plummeting, and the board of directors united to threaten Ethan with a complete takeover unless he seized Clara's stock to consolidate power. Ethan retaliated by freezing Mia's journalism assignments to force Clara to beg for mercy. A week before the emergency shareholder meeting, Tanner Reid called Leela to a quiet tea house on the outskirts of the city. He slid a bank statement across the table. 5 million yuan from Vice Chairman Wang. What did he pay you for? Leela's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. You're doing this because you're in love with Clara, aren't you? Too bad she never saw you that way. Tanner didn't flinch. He simply pressed the record button on his phone. Tell me the truth, Leela, or I release this statement to the press anyway. Leela laughed bitterly. Fine. Wang promised me the lead role in the next S-class historical drama if I helped him destroy Clara's reputation and drive a wedge between her and Ethan. Ethan is so easy to manipulate. Every time I cry, brother, I'm scared. He forgets his own wife exists. Do you think I care about him? I care about my career. Tanner stopped the recording and stood up. Thank you. This will be played at the shareholders' meeting. Leela lunged for the phone, but Tanner's assistant blocked her. She screamed, "You tricked me!" Tanner turned at the door. I didn't trick you. Your own greed did. You used his guilt to destroy the one woman who truly loved him. You'll have to answer for that. Tanner stepped in immediately, deploying his family's media conglomerate to publish full evidence clearing Mia and Clara of all fabricated accusations. He also retained elite corporate attorneys to produce Harold's original will, proving the 20% equity belonged solely to Clara, independent of any marital ties. During an emergency shareholder meeting, Tanner broadcast all audio recordings of Leela colluding with corrupt board members to sabotage the company and steal Ethan's position. Every brand and agency severed ties with Leela instantly. Her management terminated her contract, and she vanished from the city after facing massive breach of contract fines. Watching the mountain of incriminating evidence play across the conference room screen, Ethan finally comprehended every cruel choice he'd made over 3 years of hidden marriage. He replayed every memory in his mind, Clara bleeding out alone while he comforted a minorly injured actress, her quiet years of unspoken devotion, the child they'd lost that he'd never once asked about. After the meeting adjourned, he searched every apartment, cafe, and riverside spot they'd ever visited together, only to find all traces of Clara erased without a single note left behind. Clara had taken her stock dividends and relocated to a quiet riverside town hundreds of miles south of Haisheng. She purchased a small independent bookstore to operate full-time, devoting her days to healing the physical scars from her surgery and the lifelong trauma of unrequited love. She rose each dawn to read old books, walked the riverbank at sunset, and cut all contact with the city's corporate drama that had destroyed her youth. Ethan put aside every corporate obligation and spent 6 months traveling across every southern town, searching tirelessly for Clara. He finally found her one soft evening, standing behind her bookstore's window, dressed in plain linen, her features softened and free of the perpetual anxiety that had haunted her in Haisheng. No trace of subservience lingered on her face. She carried a quiet, self-contained peace that no amount of wealth or his protection could ever grant her. Ethan's eyes flooded with tears as he set aside every ounce of pride and possessiveness to confess every selfish mistake he'd ever made. I married you only to seize corporate power, blind to the love you gave me for a decade. I abandoned you when your life hung in the balance, trusted manipulative lies over your word, and punished Mia to force your submission. I see now you are the only person I have ever truly loved. I will step down as CEO and surrender most of my holdings if you will give me a chance to make amends. Clara shook her head gently, no hatred burning in her heart, only quiet acceptance. I hold no resentment toward you anymore, but I cannot go back. I spent years drowning in despair at your side, nearly losing my life in the process. The tender care I've always longed for was never something you could offer. I will manage grandfather's shares independently and will never interfere with Ward Group's operations. We are fully even from this moment onward. She slid fully completed divorce paperwork across the wooden counter, explaining all legal proceedings would be handled by her attorneys, with no further required meetings between them. Ethan refused to return to the city, purchasing a small cottage directly beside her bookstore to live permanently. He never intruded on her daily life, only rising each dawn to deliver herbal medicinal broths prescribed by a specialist for her chronic post-surgery weakness, tending to her flower beds and repairing the shop's leak roof quietly from a distance. He never begged for reconciliation, only sought to atone for years of neglect through silent, consistent acts of care. 1 full year later, Ethan submitted his official resignation as Ward Group CEO, transferring executive authority to neutral third-party professional managers. He gifted most of his personal real estate and corporate holdings to Clara as long overdue reparations and issued a public formal apology to Mia, lifting all restrictions, blocking her journalism work. Clara declined ownership of the vast properties he offered, accepting only a potted white camellia bush, the very flower he'd given her the day she first arrived at the Ward mansion, aged 15. She allowed him to drop by the bookstore occasionally to discuss literature and local weather, but they never revisited the pain of their failed marriage, maintaining a gentle, clear boundary between acquaintances. Tanner visited the small town every 2 months, occasionally crossing paths with Ethan without the former hostility between them, merely reminding him to respect Clara's firm choice to remain apart. Mia travelled down frequently on weekends to spend time with her best friend, her journalism career thriving once more as she focused on women's rights documentaries. All lingering bitterness faded as she watched Clara's peaceful, fulfilling new life unfold. Years slipped by unhurriedly. Ethan never remarried, remaining in the riverside cottage next to the bookstore for the rest of his life. Each spring he brought fresh white camellias to her windowsill, never lingering long enough to disrupt her calm routine. Clara chose lifelong solitude, running her quiet bookstore and hosting free weekly children's reading hours for local town youth. Many kind, gentle men expressed romantic interest in her over the years, yet she turned every suitor away. She had learned to find complete happiness and fulfillment within herself, with no need for a partner's affection to fill the void. The wounds of her hidden, loveless marriage faded into faint, harmless scars across her heart, a painful but vital lesson about self-worth. Ethan spent every remaining year of his life in quiet penance, watching her peaceful days unfold from a distance, never demanding forgiveness or a second chance. They lived side by side in the same small riverside town for decades, sharing the same soft sunsets and quiet river breezes, yet walking entirely separate, untangled paths toward their own individual peace and complete, unshackled happiness. 10 years later, on a golden autumn afternoon, Clara's bookstore celebrated its 10th anniversary. Local children gathered around her as she read a picture book about courage. Outside the window, Ethan, now grey-haired and slower in his movements, trimmed the hedge of white camellias he had planted along her fence. After the reading, Clara stepped outside and, for the first time in a decade, walked over to him. "Ethan," she said quietly, "do you regret these 10 years?" He looked up, his eyes clear and calm. "I don't regret losing you. I regret that it took your 10 years of despair to teach me what love truly means." Clara was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't hate you anymore. Those years also taught me something. Love isn't something you beg for. It grows from within." She turned and went back inside, closing the door gently. Ethan watched her silhouette through the glass, then bent down to pat the soil around the newly planted camellia. "Then I'll spend the rest of my years watching over your flowers," he murmured to himself. "That's enough." That evening, the warm yellow light from the bookstore and the pale glow from Ethan's small cottage shone across the cobblestone street. They were no longer close, but they no longer hurt. They simply glowed, side by side, each in their own piece.